Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Coffee with Captain Jan Wiles of the Pride of Baltimore 2 and Chief Mate Jeff Crosby behind the camera on this Saturday, the 26th of September here in Baltimore. It's mild weather, wet, rainy, soon to do some clearing, but stay overcast for the rest of the day, well, most of the day. So, welcome.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us this morning. This morning we're going to be talking about some tall ship races that Pride has been into, but before we get into that, do you have an update for the people on what we've been up to?
Well, me continuing the monitoring process and then looking at next year, 2021, working with staff to consider the calendar. You know, it's Maryland Day comes up in March 25th, and so we're keeping an eye on that. We're looking at the rest of the season. We don't know. Maybe we'd go out to Bermuda. There's been an invitation to collaborate with a couple of vessels to go to Bermuda in early June.
And those are out of Annapolis, right?
Well, they're out of everywhere, but they follow the season. They sort of do their own guest crew programming in the model of the Pride. Not so much modeling Pride, but there's a lot of parallel. It's participation. It's not a high-end yacht charter thing. It's more get involved with the operating of the boat. And they work in the Caribbean, they work in Middle Atlantic, and they work up in Nova Scotia and in New England. So then we're, guess what? It's going to be 100 years of the Blue Nose launching. The original Blue Nose coming up in August of next year. So there's a wish to be to hold. They want to hold a gathering. So
Sure.
we're keeping an eye on that too. So
Yeah,
get up there.
go up to Nova Scotia and celebrate a boat birthday.
Yeah, and then of course we can't do the October Chesapeake Bay race this year. So we're looking at that next year.
Yeah, awesome. That's all pretty exciting. So Pride of Baltimore 2 has been a part of a number of races. So can you spend a little bit of time kind of describing why Pride has been part of races, you know, who generally hosts them, and what's Pride's performance just overall generally been?
Actually, it's a good question because we didn't do international races until the turn of the century. Prior to that, Tall Ships America was doing domestic stuff with some participation in international racing. So when the fleet came over, so long before I got involved with Pride of Baltimore, 1976 was a whole international fleet racing to Bermuda, and then Bermuda to Newport, and then just going into the parades and tall ship festivals. And I was mate of a boat, and we did a domestic race, but qualified for the international prizes because of the way that race is run. The first Pride never raced. The second Pride, we didn't get in. We did some domestic racing with the local stuff, such as here in the Chesapeake Bay. But when it came to ocean stuff, that really didn't start to kick off until near the turn of the century. And then Tall Ships America and Sail Training International did a lot of collaborating. The millennial year 2000 was a pretty kick-off year.
Can you describe that race? What was that race like?
Well, we had a couple of feeder races. New London said, "Hey, we want to answer to a sort of a special grudge match going on between Highlander Sea and Pride of Baltimore."
Oh,
yeah. So up in the Great Lakes, Tall Ships America had hosted in a previous year, 1999, had hosted the Great Lakes gatherings, and so the vessel was coming down the East Coast and joined in the Gloucester parade race, which is not a handicap race. That's just a Gloucester thing in September. and managed the best. I wasn't on board at the time. It was Dan Parrott. Managed the best to Highlander C. Then that same year, in '99, the Chesapeake Bay race, the two got together again. Again, Dan Parrott was captain of the boat because we were taking turns in the Chesapeake Bay race, and Highlander C bested Pride. So we come to 2000.
It's kind of like this back and forth, yeah.
So somehow this got going, and how New London got involved, I can't quite remember. I think it was an idea of spinning off of the big gathering in Boston after the 4th of July event. How did that work? I can't remember. It doesn't matter. So there was a triangle race off of New London, and Pride bested Highlander C. I was on board for that one. And then carrying on as a feeder race, we went up to the Boston Tall Ships Festival, and then there was a race, international race, between Boston and Nova Scotia. And we played, Highlander C and Pride played a bit of this get ahead of each other along the coast of southwest coast of Nova Scotia. They came up from behind. It was a cold front change with no visibility all the way across the Gulf of Maine. Nobody knew where anybody was.
Sure. Which is not atypical of Maine.
And then it cleared up a little bit as we approached Cape Sable, and we saw each other. There was quite a lot of clustering, and then the cold front came through in darkness, and it was overnight. Overnight we went around Cape Sable, and in the morning, I remember Pride clearing the fog bank as this northwest breeze had come in, and we're charging. We're just we're sort of beam reaching, and we're just charging. Too much for the Tagallon, I think, at the time, but we had everything else going. And behind us, there was this clear fog bank, and there was this. By the radar, I knew there was some people behind us. This is long before AIS, so. Then it was a bowsprit, just a bowsprit, and a jib. And then a minute later, it was the bow and the bowsprit. And you could see the curve, and I realized it was Highlander C. And then a minute later, you could see the foremast and the three headsails and the bow. So it was pretty dramatic.
As they come charging out of the fog, yeah.
And of course, she's a lot longer than Pride, so she's going to just go zoom by. So that's exactly what she did. She went zoom by. But as the cold front filled in, the wind rotated. It was one of those highs where the pattern was not a sustained northwest, and it started to go west, which meant we were going broader, and eventually dead downwind, headed for Halifax. Pardon me. And so we're both port tack, so we're broad reaching, and she's staying ahead. We can't catch up with her. We have the rake, which means we have also the loose-footed sails. We can't sail as deep as she can. So I thought to myself, so what are we going to do with this? Just follow her?
Sure, yeah.
And she's curving into the shore. She's eventually going to have to jibe, and we're going to wind up to do something. I said, you know what? I've heard tell that in the 12-meter races of the America's Cup, you just can't follow. And of course, I've played around with a little bit of the IOR stuff. The same thing. If you just can't. You're not going to get anywhere following, so you got to do something else.
Yeah,
right? Unless it's really wildly wrong, do something else. So I said, well, we're going to have to jibe anyway. We're going to have to jibe twice because we're not going to finish on the other jibe. So we split tacks, split jibes, and I went offshore maybe a half an hour or less, not long, and we jibed again, and we powered over Highlander C.
No kidding.
Got through the finish right off the end there, and then zoomed up into Halifax as the wind was southwest, so it meant it was a favorable breeze for going right in. We had the Tagallon up at this point.
Yeah, sure.
And there's a shot we have of Pride that you might have seen. She's all powered up, and the shot's taken from port beam or just after the beam. Anyway, somebody local up there got that shot, and it's been a popular shot. And so we got all the way up into Halifax. and turned around because she was behind us now coming up, and we saluted them with a cannon shot. We went down their lee as we went the other way, and so that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
And so after that, it was about going across the Atlantic.
Right.
And all through this time, Leslie reminds me, my wife Leslie, because I had invited her. We were dating at the time, and I had invited her to come along in her summertime between teaching school, earth science, to be the sort of the chronicleizer, because she had had that experience as the teacher aboard on loan from the State Department of Education for the Asia trip. So they were taking advantage of the Pride's mission out there to talk about Maryland education, create partnerships out there in Asia, China, Taiwan, Korea, Japan. And so I invited her to be our chronicler. We were going to be too busy between the guest crew on board, which were younger folks, purpose because to qualify for the prizes, you had to have at least 50% of the crew were folks 25 and younger.
Okay,
Down
sure.
to minimum would be 15. So with her aboard and fortunately our crew makeup, we could qualify for that. And so she chronologized. And so anyway, she reminds me of some details. But that start, there's a photograph that I think our social media showed maybe a month or so ago, 2 months ago, of the start of the Halifax race headed to England for the finish off of Isle of Wight. And it's a field of 40 boats. There are 3 big square riggers, the Mere, the biggest one being the Krusenstern, the Mere.
The Krusenstern, an old P liner, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Darmajeji, Polish vessel, along with a whole host of other sizes and rigs and what have you. And so that was the start. It was a nice moderate breeze out of the southwest. So southwest. And so Pride was dressed up without the stunsail because we weren't allowed to carry the stunsail and the wind angle wasn't good for the start anyway. Stunsails were never allowed in international races, STI, up until a couple years later. So we were all dressed up and we got a fairly decent start, and the small boats scampered ahead. Before dark, the Mere, totally dressed up, braced up sharp, she comes through. Now we're doing 8 or 9 knots in say a true wind of 10 to 11, smooth sea. She's doing more than we are by a fair amount. Steady as a rock.
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know, maybe 7 degrees of heel, maybe 5. And steady as a rock, just cruise through and ahead. That was really a majestic sight. Talk about clipper ship, kind of what we've read about, and a real proof of square riggers go to windward. Square riggers are good, can be very good performers. Now you get a Krusenstern, her hull is so bulky, she can be properly set up, but she's just not going to go that slippery through the water. But Mere was really quite the show on that afternoon. So anyway, we get off to across the Atlantic, and the rule was to avoid the Grand Banks of Newfoundland, because that gets cold water. That gets a lot of ice can come down that far. So they were routing us around. So we had a waypoint, and then it was straight into Isle of Wight. The other waypoint was we had to pass south of the Isles of Shoals. So we cruising along, falling behind because some of these boats are really quick, and then it goes flat. We had mirror finish ocean water. As I recall, it was like a day and a half.
Wow.
Now, it covered everybody to one degree or another. The crew got so bored during watches that there was a competition for paper boats set over the side to see who could go faster with their paper boats. Finally, a breeze started to fill in, and and I can't remember how it worked out, but eventually it started to come up easterly and then southeasterly, which is hard work going to the east. And when I'm watching the weather, we got more paper in the captain's cabin from the fax machine.
From the weather fax?
From the weather fax machine.
Yeah, and those print out in like really long strips of paper
and then
as
I would
well.
fold them up, right? And I'm not listening to just one station.
Yeah.
I'm dialed in now, coming out of Halifax. I'm dialed into the Canadians and dialed into the Americans. And before we got to Mid-Atlantic, or around as we approached Mid-Atlantic, I started to pick up the United Kingdom. So I got paper coming out of this machine. And meanwhile, trying to figure out how we're going to deal with this. What are we going to do? And we're falling behind the leaders. We're 40 boats in the fleet, and they're both like Schooner Brilliant. This is Sparkman Stevens from Olin Stevens, really, from 1932. The Italian Navy had a Sparkman and Stevens yawl. I don't remember her year. The leader of the whole fleet was this 40-odd foot two-tonner. Now, anybody who's followed racing, there was a period of time in the IOR where there was sort of the two-ton competition. It was a rule thing. And this is a German aluminum-built competitor that had retired and then turned into sail training. And so one stick, high efficiency. She's way out.
Gone, yeah.
And next to nothing in the water than a fin. So, but this low has been forecast by the Americans and the Canadians to come from the west and go straight east, right towards the Grand Banks of Newfoundland, and then eventually, as we saw it unfold, every 6 hours we're getting updates. So we're seeing a forecast, and there was a little bit of deviation, but generally speaking, as it got closer, you could see a narrowing of the agreement that it was going to more or less get to Mid-Atlantic and then zoom north. And there was going to be this relationship between a high pressure over the eastern Atlantic, the Azorian high, and this low, and there was going to be a wind pattern on the northwest semicircle of this high between the low and the high, the dissipating low and the high, where there'd be some favorable wind for getting on our way. But we had to go through the process of the low capturing us. And I was pretty involved with how to navigate to stay to the southern semicircle of that. So we actually tacked and went port tack for a while. The finish is over the port quarter.
Sure, yeah.
And
basically behind you.
Yeah. So we flipped over, and as the wind built out of the southeast, and we're trimmed up pretty close before the sea got big, and knowing it was going to open up, we're sailing faster and faster and faster and faster, and there's a bit of a sea coming out of the southeast, so it's a bit of a plunge, and we blew the lower part of the staysail out. Below the reef. So we reefed it and then blew the whole staysail out. And it took me, I felt so stupid. It took me a while to realize that with the tack of the staysail all the way out to the end of the bowsprit, there's this big belly of a sail. And as she's plunging through a sea, she's putting a whole wave into the sail because it curves so far out.
Basically a big bag capturing seawater, yeah.
So we learned a trick. We took the storm jib and put it on the staysail stay.
Sure.
And that worked with the jib very, very nicely and opened up the slot it acted like a blade inside of the jib.
Yeah, because that's got a higher cut foot, right?
Right, yeah. And so it worked pretty well for that situation. But it was continuing to build. The conditions were continuing to build, but also veering. So we just shortened down. So the jib came down and got triced. The jib top had already been taken down and got taken off the headsail and brought head rig and brought back aboard.
And why is that a procedure?
The jib top, we take advantage of modern piston hanks, so we can reduce the amount of chance of the head rig going green under the water. so by a plunge. And so with the jib down, we sausage. You take the halyard, put it on the clew, do a very tight tying up with a long lace line is our technique, and then you hoist the clew way up, and that acts as a lot less resistance to the chance. Now, we don't allow the head rig to go down, but if there's a chance of it, that helps reduce the resistance of coming out of the water.
Sure.
Meanwhile, we're reducing the main down, and we finally go to storm trysail on the main. Because we're going to see 40 knots, and the question is how close are we going to be able to sail to our course line based on the waypoint, while at the same time as low is approaching and when does the wind start to rotate. We were fortunate insofar we were just far enough south that we didn't have to lose it on a waypoint, so we were able to carry the course around. But we got down to just the storm jib on the staysail stay, foremast stay, the full foresail, and the storm trysail. And we went into the night where the peak of the wind occurred, and we had a beam sea, roughly 10, maybe getting up to 12 feet, and we had wind of roughly estimating between gusts of maybe north of 50, but generally 35 to 40. And so we were charging and not taking anything green. We had a lot of spray, but nothing green. And Chris Flansburgh was chief mate at the time, and through the night on his watch, he was saying during the puffs, he says, well, we're seeing some pretty high puffs. And I said, okay, but are we taking anything green over the lee side? And he said, no, it's just that it gets deck edge wet, not deck edge, but rail bulwarks to the edge. I said, okay, we'll white knuckle it for now. We'll just see how it goes. And we went through the night like that. Inboard the boat, that boat with the bunks and everything else, and 30 degrees is
pretty significant.
Is crawl around on your hands and knees type stuff with a boat that wide.
I mean, everybody's sleeping on the leeward side whether they want to or not.
It's not a rough ride.
Sure.
We're not slamming and banging. We're going up and down and at a steady angle, relatively steady angle here between, say, 20 and 30. And, so when we reflect back to that other story about the dismasting, that would have been horrifying.
Right.
But we only had the one jib and it was very small.
Yeah.
So we never stressed the iron. It was 5 years later and a whole bunch of sailing later before that happened. So So anyhow, that combination was really a great combination because we had the yards brace. There was nothing up aloft. We were doing very well, and as dawn broke, everything else changed. The wind was really moderating. We were able to set more sail and sheet away and start to put a wind on the quarter, really on the quarter, and we made a decision to sail off to the north of northeast, well north of the rum line for the finish, because we wanted to stick in this ridge, as it's called, around this high. And there was one crest that got all sloppy. When the wind reduces, these crests go absolutely wild in the sense that they can fall any old which way.
Sure.
There's no wind to push them in one general direction.
Yeah.
And meanwhile,
so
all that
they're
pressure,
losing momentum.
the kinetic energy is popping out of the sea,
Yeah.
and there's no wind to direct these crests. We had one wander around we had the sea coming on the quarter, but when I say the quarter, it's going to pass us. It's not a beam, it's just a quarter. But for some reason, this crest popped up and came aboard. We had depth of water on deck that had to have filled the height of the cabin and the bulwark.
Jeez.
And we're making 7-8 knots at this point, and it roared around, but it also splashed on the house top, and we had some water come down below. Fortunately, no computers are in the way.
Right.
It's like, well, where did that come from?
Yeah.
But anyway, we piled on sail, and I think before dark we had the Tagalan on her, and we were going, and there was this other boat. We crossed paths with a Dutch three-master, still can't think of her name, and they were going easterly-ish. We're going quite a bit north-northeasterly, and she comes under our stern, and there's a bunch of these little white snap lights. They had a bunch of trainees taking pictures of the Pride in the distance.
Yeah.
So during this race, you're making these reports back to the organizers twice a day. And it's all done by basically it's all, back then it was all done by SSB to a boat in the fleet. Then they had satellite commands going on. And so we were getting the results back. So we're copying each other's position like mad, plotting like mad. And I was watching the leaders of the fleet sort of going like this. And then as we got going after this low passed by, we were roaring along around, 190 to 210 miles a day. They're doing 100, doing 50. I think one of the big square riggers down to 30 miles a day.
Oh boy,
So
that's grueling. Yeah.
So, and of course the two-tonner still
Just
out
gone.
there, going slow,
Yeah.
but still out there.
But still going. Yeah.
So I was pinching myself as to how long this is going on. Now, in the midst of all this, two things were going on. There was a German vessel crew, can't think of her name, and this kid on board, this trainee crew member might have been, he created a game. And it was well thought out game. It was like that business of doing war where you bomb each other by sort of tic-tac kind of thing. Well, he'd taken that basic idea and created a bunch of guidelines and a bunch of patterns, and he had enough kits for maybe 20 boats. And we got one of the kits. So at a specific time on the SSB, these trainees are playing this game.
Yeah.
And you hear a grid description to a specific boat, and then you hear the response, "Arg, you got us!" And it was a wonderful SSB conversation going on. It was fireside stuff. It was from listening to sort of some kind of mystery show or adventure show. It was really great fun, and the creativity of this one guy creating all this stuff, that was stunning. And our crew had a blast with it. And again, it was scoring, and I can't remember the details beyond that, but it was really quite adventurous. The other thing was they had a medical emergency in the fleet. And one of the vessels, I think it was Pagoria, but one of the vessels, moderate size, 120, 130 feet, had a back injury. And they did not have a doctor aboard. So they did a medical transfer to the Krusenstern, which had a doctor on board.
Sure.
Then the Krusenstern decided that they had a reason and a chance to network with a Canadian helicopter out of St. John's, Newfoundland, to do an evacuation. So Krusenstern diverts to get the distance down, to put it within the realm of the helicopter. So that was going on the radio as well. And then she came back, and both boats came back onto the race. And there's a big credit. We knew that everybody knows that's how it works. There's a big credit for all that. So we finally go past the Isles of Shoals, a fair weather day. It's a summer day, southwest breeze. We'd made this big curve, this big arc going north and then east. And we're 3 hours behind the two-tonner at Isles of Shoals as we enter the English Channel, and now we're jibing downwind. And we're 9 hours behind her at the finish off the South End Isle of Wight. Schooner Brilliant is 3 hours behind us at the finish. So Pride wound up coming from behind a fair amount, being the first wooden vessel to cross the finish line, the oldest rig style of the fleet to cross the finish line first. first at all, I guess. And then we wound up waiting the results for like 5 days. We're parked in the dock over there in England, southern England, waiting for the results.
For the rest of
because things got because the high pressure out of, I think it might have been the same high pressure. The high pressure out of the Azores parked itself a little further north and wound up dead calm in the English Channel. Mm-hmm. So boats were dropping anchor to keep from drifting back if they could get to the depth. And so we wound up first in class, but about fifth in fleet because of the Krusenstern's credit. Mm-hmm. And that's all fair, and it's all fine. And so the awards ceremony was in Amsterdam. And Amsterdam, the reason it was done there was it was Sail Amsterdam. And that town, that harbor, during a Sail Amsterdam, you can't go swimming in the water because you can't find the water because it's full of boats.
Yeah, that's a busy
port. You can
port.
literally walk across anywhere you wanted to go with all the boats. It was really a fascinating thing. And I wound up being introduced to the Dutch Prince of Orange, who's quite a yachting sportsman, because he was so curious about the pride, because he's looking at all these boats off this veranda after the award ceremony. And one of them was the Stad Amsterdam, because that was her coming out year. That was their event for coming out. And that's right in front of him. But he was focused on this boat with all the leaning back masts. So that was quite an honor. Spoke with him for about 15 minutes describing the rake and the performance and the style and the period. And so that millennial race stands out in my mind as being, from a captain's point of view, as being quite the exercise of staying on top of the weather, sort of realizing something we'd never realized is that we get into a big kind of close reach situation with the boat. Take the staysail down. Just take it down.
Yep.
And if you want to dig out the storm trysail, go ahead and do that. But just take the staysail down, because you can't, unless you undid the tack and took a reef in and undid the tack and put it up much higher. And that's a slot problem because of the way the rig is done. I wouldn't recommend it. I just take it down, do without. If you got that much breeze, if you got that much speed, that you got that situation where you're putting a wave way up in the air because of the flared bow, just strike the staysail and get it down, and you're going well enough already.
Right. And, it's not like you're getting a big advantage.
Yeah. So although in fractions, I think the storm jib on the forestay was of value.
Yeah.
How valuable? I don't know.
That's hard to measure.
But it was pulling. I mean, there was real resistance in that sheet at that time. So, and then of course during the gale, when we had it and nothing else up front, it was a good slot situation between the foresail and the storm jib. So, other races, you and I were together for the round.
The Prince Edward Island race. Yeah, that was a pretty memorable race. Do you want to tell that story?
Well, what was your sense of it? Can you give a little bit of yours?
Sure. It was the first time that I joined the boat, so this would have been in 2008 on the way out of the Great Lakes, and stopping in Prince Edward Island to do this race around the island. We had Spirit of Bermuda came up to compete, and Schooner Virginia came up to compete, and I'm sure there were other boats, I just don't remember them. Those are the two that stick in my mind. But it was a pretty wild race. We started the race and sailed down to the South Shore and dropped the hook with everything set. Have the current going on the south end of the island there, so it was pushing us, back towards the start line.
Yeah, we were going clockwise around the island, starting in Summerside, which is near the bridge.
Yeah.
Right at the bridge, basically, and doing a clockwise full around the island race. And you had a choice in the light air of the start to run along the shore of Prince Edward Island or something else, and the current was going to be contrary for the going to the western end of the island. Well, I took a flyer and went to the South Shore because of an assessment I was making, which was, I think, we don't want to fight the current. It's going to be a battle on the shore. let's just get to the southern side because that's where the wind's going to come up anyway. So that's what we did.
Yeah. Drop the hook and then
There was
waited.
such light air before the sou'wester picked up that we didn't have to take any sail while we had the anchor down. Headsails,
Yeah.
square topsail.
There was a lobster boat that came out while we're at anchor with everything up, and you were sitting on the transom, and this boat comes up behind the boat and says, where's this boat from? And he just pointed straight down, didn't say a word. Pride of Baltimore. Yeah, but from there, the wind picked up and, off we went racing around the island. But yeah, so what was kind of your sense of how things went?
Well, the strategy to go all the way across the Northumberland Straits when you're going to go clockwise around the island was sort of like, well, okay, how much of a flyer was this?
Mm-hmm.
So as we got to sundown, we're underway now. We got the southwest breeze. We're anchors up and we're roaring back across the Northumberland Straits. We catch up just as dark is occurring. We fall in behind the Spirit of Bermuda like 2 or 3 boat lengths, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
And we learned later that they were totally mystified as to where in the world did you come from?
Right. Because the rest of the fleet was on the northern side of that channel.
Yeah, and that's a fairly wide passageway through there. And so we were more or less out of sight.
Mm-hmm.
On a really clear day, at good binoculars, you could sort of pick things out. And I was sort of seeing what was going on, but had no real way of vectoring as to whether we were choking or staying competitive. And it turned out we had stayed competitive. I don't think we'd have stayed as competitive had we stayed in the North Shore. But, you have to get an alternative universe and go play that again the other way to find that out. And by this time, the breeze is up. And we're roaring. We're doing 8-9 knots with Spirit of Bermuda right there. And we have a broad reach turn mark at the corner. And we have to go north a bit before we turn again, put her on a starboard tack, jibe around. And we're hounding the Spirit of Bermuda. We're just clank, 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 just big bow wave right on our stern.
Which Spirit of Bermuda is a traditional boat built not so traditionally.
Oh yeah, she's got some really hidden powers in her because of that flexible rig. Because it's a pole arrangement, 3 masts. It's almost unstayed. It isn't, but it's almost, and so they can really lose some of their excess power with mast bending. And she's marked jib-headed, so she doesn't carry a lot of this width of sail plan that traditional boats with squares and stuff. So anyway, she and her hull, her stability, she can stand up to the rig, so she does very well. She's not much shorter than we are. I think she's almost the same length waterline. We're very close. Anyhow, jibe around the north side, and then it's a broad reach, full length of the island now. And all day long, from the night jibe, which is like around midnight, all day long until near sundown is the length of that north leg. And it was just straight as an arrow. Do the best you can. Bermuda is elongating on us. We can't quite keep her speed as we're doing that, but not by much. And we turn the corner and we go back hard on the wind. So you're going with everything, stunsail, gansail, and now you have weight. You can't do this. You can't carry the stunsail. And then the wind is too strong for the gansail. So I can't remember. We probably kept the jib top. So I had to dump the gansail, sharpen up, trim in. I can't remember if we kept the main gaff topsail going to wind, because that can be a bit of a weather helm thing. And I probably waited until we turned and hardened up to decide about that. But now we're beaten to windward in this sou'wester, going around the east end of the island to work our way back into the Northumberland Straits, and it's getting dark. And there's a fair amount of current all around that island, so particularly at the east end. And so we're struggling with that. And overnight, we can observe how the boats are doing and I don't know. Did we have AIS then? I think we had AIS then, because we could see that Virginia.
Yeah, we did have AIS then. Yeah.
So I could see Virginia making great speed, horrifying speed to windward, but it was 10 degrees wider than ours.
Sure.
Well, not faster than we were going, but 10 degrees wider.
Mm-hmm.
So being hemmed in by the island and the mainland, she just couldn't get past us. And we started to eke out a heading ahead of her. Meanwhile, Bermuda sloop is just gone down the road. So it was a roar coming up the Northumberland Straits. We got into town, and there was a lot of kibitzing going on about, well, how'd you do? How'd you do? And Bermuda sloop crew were a little bit disappointed because by their calculations, we'd saved our time.
Yeah.
And we weren't so sure that we had.
It was pretty close.
Yeah. And there was a cash prize. This is interesting. This is a cash prize idea.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like 30,000 for the winner, or was it 20,000 for the winner and 10,000 for the second?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Canadian dollars. It was not insignificant. And the next day after this finish was going to be the award ceremony, and overnight, stories being told. There was a big brouhaha about our solution to handling the lobster pots of the time, because we were twin screw, and so we were putting the engines in reverse to cut, because I wasn't going to hang someone over the side for the depth, and I wasn't going to stop the boat sailing because the breeze is just too great for that stuff.
Yeah.
The amount of sail area involved and all that sort of stuff. So there was a protest, and the organizers were through Tall Ships America. Jonathan Harley was a representative hired by the organizers here in the island, and he didn't go for the safety side of it. He just followed whatever the race committee was, which is a yacht club in the area, and the Corinthians mindset is really, really strong. Is you start your engine, you're done. You take yourself out of the race. It's a very, very strong sportsmanship, gentlewoman thing, and it's to be applauded. But they didn't understand the business of what is safety. They had such a big thing about the, you violated the regulations. You put the engine in gear, and so the fact it was in reverse.
Right.
So there was a protest. We lost the protest, and so we took second when we had corrected to first. So it's okay. It was quite the race going around that island.
Yeah, very memorable, very dramatic. Let's see here. Leslie asked a question. In the 2000 race, who said, "First time I've been racing while tied to the dock"?
Oh, that was Chris Flansburgh, the chief mate. Yeah, he would. We were there. We were tied to the dock alongside this wonderful light ship from years ago that had been turned into a bar.
Oh, sure.
So you had time off. You'd go and relax, and you'd come back for the time when the SSB schedule was being sent out for where everybody stood. And so we'd plot it, and we'd figure out the calculus and say, well, they haven't caught us yet for time. They haven't caught us yet for time. Sure. And so he'd come back every time. We'd be laying in the bunk. We'd be listening back aft to the SSB, and that's when he quipped, Of course, in the IOR days, in the long distance, that was a common thing.
Sure.
You could, but not for. It was a wonderful little venue of 3 to 4 days anyway. 3 days anyway. It might be exaggeration to say 5 days. I think the correction was a 5-day correction or fifth, but I think it was 3 days. We were waiting for the final fleet to get across the line.
Sure.
And then we still had another week to go before Amsterdam, so we had some sailing to do to get further east. So an easy time of that. But yeah, that was Chris Flansburgh.
Yeah,
great trip. He's been with us a number of times. He's part of the Asia trip. Burned his hands a bit saving the Tgallant, because at that time the cleat was in straight alignment for the Tgallant halyard instead of cocked, and so it would jam up because the lead was not correct. And when it slipped during a strike, um, it got all the way to the water before he was able to get it under control.
Oof.
And he took quite a bit of skin off. Fortunately, not so serious,
Right.
but still serious enough. But he saved it. And I'm steering off, and I'm seeing the Tagallon skipping the water like a kite behind me at the helm.
Oh, that's not good.
And I'm thinking, don't let go.
We
But I'm
need
not-
that.
Get it in, because you can't slow the boat down.
Yeah.
And it's not so easy. So well, he sacrificed his skin there. It was great
Yeah.
result, although painful for him.
No kidding. And we still have it. Same to gallant. Same to gallant yard. So thank you, Chris. I think we have time for one more race story here. Do you have another kind of cool, fun race in mind?
No, I don't.
Bermuda to Charleston?
Well, that was just great because it was. Well, okay. There's a shot. There's an interesting shot that was taken of Pride, and maybe you remember it. She's just charging. She's got no land around her. It's taken from very high up. Mm. So at the start of the Bermuda 2009 Bermuda to Charleston race, international race, Sail Training International, and married up with Tall Ships America, the wind was southwest. So at the east end of the island, the first leg was a north-south leg, and you get well to the south, and you make a run for the starting line, and it was blowing 20. And so we have 4 lowers in the square top, and we're trimmed just right, and she's just charging. So that's that photograph. So that's the start of it. And then we get to the turn mark, and then we're hard on the wind. So we're starting at the same time as the Bermuda sloop. Mm-hmm. And when we all harden up, go the other way, that got to be like, say goodbye to the Bermuda sloop. Meanwhile, there are these other square riggers in the race. They have that are all starting at just in that general vicinity, and watching them sail and then take the turn and harden up and go. There was one there that was really close to us in terms of angle on the wind, mm-hmm. And going match speed. So you got a boat that's almost twice as long on the water, if not longer, than we are on the water, and only 5 degrees different in terms of closest to the wind, effective.
Yeah.
That was another one of those, we in this North America world have a tendency to say, square riggers can't go to windward. Well, the Europeans have been fighting this battle for millennia, plural, more than one, and so they figured it out last 500 years, 600 years, they figured it out, particularly since the last 100 years.
Sure.
150 years. So it was fascinating to watch them. So it was a question as to, so the wind changed, we started broad reaching, and so we were having a ball just going across and then battle around the Gulf Stream. So we took first in class, and one of the compliments we got was from the Captain Miranda. Mm-hmm. She's quite a bit longer than we are, but she's not as big as the biggest boats. And they were very complimentary of how fast and handsome and wonderful the Pride is. And so it was always very flattering, but we were able to take first in class on that one.
And we're second across the line, if I remember correctly, right?
I don't recall, because...
Or were we first across the line?
No, we weren't first. But I don't know. Maybe we were. So Bermuda sloop had to drop out of the race.
Yeah.
Because she had a date with a shipyard over on the eastern coast, and so that was a bit disappointing because we were beginning to hold our own in the light air that was happening during the Gulf Stream crossing. We were down to 7 knots true wind, mm-hmm. flat sea, but there was a lot of current, so you tack one way and you're sort of getting nowhere because of the current, but you got some decent speed. You tack the other way, and so the wind's out of the southwest, and you wind up with so much current that the strength of the wind goes half of what it used to be because you're going sideways. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it was quite quite a thing. But I don't recall. Anyhow, that's just fun because Pride has another race we had. Was Scotland to northern France.
Mm-hmm.
And so in 2005, earlier in the year, we're going from not Scotland, excuse me, Ireland. Sorry, my mistake. We go into the coming out of the Celtic Sea, dead light air. We wound up with another first in class. The humorous part from my point of view about that is that they had to shorten the race. So there's this big announcement across the fleet. There had to have been 100 boats, a bunch of square riggers. This Christian Radish was really kicking that time. She did an interesting start. About a mile and back, she hits the throttle and goes with her one engine and is up to 10, 11 knots at the time of the gun. Turns the engine off and glides across. There were cheers and cat calls. That's one way to start the race. It was very light air. We're driving downwind. It was a northerly wind, and we're driving back and forth. And then we turn around the Isles of Shoals and head east into the English Channel. And as we're making our way east, and the wind is out of the north, the call goes out that they've got an arbitrary longitude line at which you cross and finish. And then, because they didn't want the boats to be late at the festival in town, La Rochelle. So I told the crew, I don't care what direction, within the context of trim, I don't care what direction you sail, just go fast.
Sure.
So all the watch leaders were working with their crew about, okay, let's do 5 degrees this way and let's see what the speed does, and let's do 5 degrees this way, and it was really interesting to hear that conversation going on because, so this is good, just go fast.
Yeah. The faster, the better.
We got to go east, we got to get there going. And it was interesting to see on AIS the performance of that handicap square rigger, the laminated one. Suddenly lost her name. The Lord Nelson's sister. Yep. And she was quite speedy. Mm-hmm. Under it was not strong wind. I mean, we had maybe 12 to 13, not more than 15 true towards the end there. She was getting along, and but it made sense because her size is so much out of the water, and mm-hmm. she's really quite slippery down below. But she carried her gear doing way in the distance. It was more like plotting her on AIS. I wasn't actually watching her, so. But those finishes in the Tall Ships International races, parades, you've been part of that, getting all dressed up and doing a parade to the award ceremony.
Yeah, it's quite a show. Yeah, and kind of just a really cool event to be a part of.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think that's going to be wrapping up for this episode. There has been some questions about the Chesapeake Bay Schooner Race. So Chesapeake Bay Schooner Race is something that happens here locally in the Chesapeake Bay, and it's typically in the month of October. So in October, we are going to have another episode of Coffee with Captain and talk about memorable Chesapeake Bay schooner races. So keep your eye out for that if you want to hear some more racing stories. Other than that, we'll be back next Saturday at 9 o'clock with another episode of Coffee with Captain. And Captain Miles, do you have any parting words for us?
Well, just before we sign off, the schooner race is a throwdown of its own
mm-hmm.
from Captain Lane Briggs of the Hampton Roads area to me, the new incoming captain of the new Pride of Baltimore 2 on the day of her launching in April 30, 1988. And this is, Captain Yon, I challenge you to a race. My Norfolk Rebel to your Pride of Baltimore 2. Case of beer. Baltimore to
Norfolk.
And so later on, he actually got it going. I didn't have any other role to play other than to turn up and go racing with the bus. But in the meantime, everybody, please stay diligent. Remain diligent.
All right. Bye, y'all.